Well, at least we got a good game tonight, huh? Packers and Seahawks. You know something's going to go down. There's going to be some controversy, Bloom. There's going to be some play, some dance, some flag. Like it's something. But hell, this has been a really good game tonight.
It has been, and it's a game that has the urgency of two teams that know that if they lose this game, they can't really entertain many thoughts of playing in January. And we saw immediately a fumble by Chris Carson, who's back after missing a couple of games, and Green Bay turns around and gets a touchdown. We saw Aaron Rodgers throw a long touchdown to the fourth string tight end. We saw another long touchdown to Aaron Jones outrunning a route. So all of a sudden, Aaron Jones has gone from underused to maybe he'll have value that rivals the top 5 fantasy running backs at this rate, being used not just as a primary runner, but as a receiver downfield, as a receiver on dump-offs. Aaron Rodgers looks fantastic in this game. So after his fantasy stock was leveling off a little bit, now we're seeing it spike in this road matchup. And there's Matt Waldman. The Aaron Jones situation is one that reminds us of patience in fantasy football, because he cost 7th, 8th, 9th round pick because of the 2-game suspension, and for a while you were frustrated, not sure whether to start him. But now I think that we can say, even just in these few weeks, he's paying off on the draft stock, assuming that you stuck with him. On the Seattle side, you continue to see them slavishly committed to the run. Chris Carson looks good after that initial fumble. Rashad Penny looks really good, got a little gimpy in this one, but they're going to continue to have that running game. But then when we saw the Packers go ahead 14-3, finally they switched to spreading the field, letting Russell Wilson pick his spots, and he was able to get a 55, 60-yard penalty downfield to Tyler Lockett. They took the lead temporarily on a Chris Carson touchdown. Doug Baldwin looks just fine, by the way. Doug Baldwin looks the same way he did a year ago or 2 years ago. So the knee issue from the preseason not worrying us. All this stuff feels like ancient history. But it's 21-17, and we are seeing this game shake loose. Both of these teams, their coaches have kept their offenses conservative despite how quality the quarterbacks are. And now I think we're going to see these quarterbacks get to play, and this one's going to go down to the end.
Let Russell Wilson do Russell Wilson things. Am I right, Matt Waldman? Absolutely. How's it going, my friend?
I'm going good. So, it looks like a good game. So.
All right, so Matt, we got a little technical issue there. We'll get that cleaned up. But Dr. Jene Bramel cleaned up as well. By the way, all three of us moving in 1 year. Bloom, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the plate tectonics of the Audible.
I guess so. Yeah. Plate tectonics of Baltimore. Dr. Gene, what in the hell's going on with Joe Flacco?
I don't know. I'm not moving this year. I'm stuck to my chair, I think. Where are you going, Cecil?
Well, I moved. Right? I moved to Roxborough. Right? Yeah, side of the mountain. So now I'm wondering if I should move
someplace else. Yeah, I think the big question is going to be whether or not there's anything to Lamar Jackson or not. It's one of those things where you guys need to talk about this, whether there's a little bit of smoke where there's fire with the Robert Griffin situation. It looks like Joe Flacco is not going to require surgery for whatever's going on with his hip, which is a good thing. Maybe he's able to come back this year, but I think a lot of that is going to depend on how the Ravens approach the backup quarterback situation, whether or not Lamar Jackson plays as more than a change of pace player, and whether or not he's effective. He's out with an illness today. Whether or not that changes the calculus of how the Ravens want to approach the quarterback situation is yet to be seen. It didn't really look like a big deal for Flacco a couple of weeks ago. He was able to finish the game, but whenever you see a player on crutches and needing specialist visits 7 to 10 days after the injury, there's reason for concern. So didn't practice so far this week. Flacco's the type of player that doesn't necessarily need to practice to play. So the Ravens are going to let this go down to the last minute probably, but you could expect to hear that he's not going to play, whether it's after Friday's practice or sometime during the weekend. And then we're just sort of on Ravens watch to see which way they decide to go with the quarterback position.
Gene, Chris Godwin, every week we go through this exercise of trying to divide up the Tampa offense and figure out who to start and who to sit. Maybe could it get a little easier this week? Of course, not easier on you if you have Chris Godwin, but for the other pieces of the offense now that he's missed 2 practices.
Maybe this is an interesting week for me. I almost feel like it's 5 years ago where we don't really know a whole lot about the injuries that players have. We didn't really see them on the field. I feel like I'm looking back at old standard definition video and just waiting for a blog post or something to happen because Chris Godwin is not going to be the only player that I say we just don't have any information on him. We're working under the suspicion. I think if I had to speculate, it's unlikely that he plays because he's not practiced a couple of days in a row. But the Buccaneers have pretty often, more so with their offensive line, but sometimes with their defensive players as well, allow guys not to practice until later in the year. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to their rookies and second-year players, as Godwin is, but we're just going to have to wait and see what Friday practice looks like. I think I would not expect him to play at this point, but again, it's hard to know exactly what's going on with the ankle and moving forwards. Friday's going to tell us whether or not Godwin's going to go, I think.
All right, Matt, what's our connection like now?
He's frozen.
I think it's right. Look at him. Look at him. He's sitting there thinking.
That's the perfect.
That's perfect, Matt Waldman. It does not get any better than that. Matt, it's all good, baby. Dr. Gene, let's talk about Donte Foreman and if you expect him to be activated now that they did kind of reintroduce him to practice. They got the 3-week window now.
Yeah, it's getting a read on Bill O'Brien in the situation is kind of rough. There seem to be a lot of positive trends with Foreman. Is kind of week 6 to week 7 when he was first eligible to come off the PUP list, and then there's not been a lot of positivity since, to the point where O'Brien was sort of saying, I don't even know if he can run 2 plays in a row with the conditioning that he's in right now. And I don't know if that's a little bit of frustration because he was expected to be back maybe a little bit sooner, or if it's O'Brien just being a little bit silly with the media. It's hard to know. There's a very good follow on Twitter, Pat the Stat, who is kind of plugged in with the Houston community, and he's been saying for some time that he expected Foreman back, and then there was a little bit of a setback. So, they had a little bit of extra time to stretch this out as long as possible to start that 3-week window. I think the Texans would like to get Foreman back. They're going to use these next couple of weeks to get him in condition, and then I think we are going to see him back. But the Achilles injuries are a tough injury for everybody to come back from, and we've really never seen a running back successfully do so. So we started to see Arian Foster a little bit before his most recent soft tissue injuries kind of ended his career. So I think there's some chances there. And there's always room for a surprise. Maybe we see Houston activate him a little bit sooner than expected. But based on what O'Brien said, I think the way to read between the lines of that is they need him to be in a little bit better conditioning than he is to trust him on the field. And hopefully he'll be able to pull that off. But I think it's probably another week or two before they see him back.
Let's stay with the Texans and just give it to me straight, Gene. I'm able to use Kiki Cutie this weekend.
Yeah, he's another player where you're just not sure. He said, I think the thing that is still giving me some pause is Cutie said last week that he wasn't going to return until he's 100%. So the Texans routinely limit their players with injury through the end of the week, but the vital piece of information with DeAndre Hopkins and a number of their defensive players, and even Lamar Miller and Deshaun Watson over the last couple of years has been, do the Texans put them on the end of the week game status report or not? So if Cootie is listed questionable, then I think we have to consider him a game time decision, and we're not really sure where he's going to be yet. Unless he's listed questionable, he tells everybody in the locker room on Friday that he feels good and he's going to play. But if he's off the injury report, then I think you can trust him, and I think that you can trust the Texans are going to use him in some capacity. Now, with Demaryius Thomas there and getting assimilated into the offense through the bye week, we'll have to sort of see how things go there. I think it's 50-50. I listed him as a game time decision on the injury expectations article again tonight. He's another player that we're going to watch pretty carefully and see what they say and what they decide to do with him on the injury report on Friday.
It is the Audible Live here on Thursday night. Got a hell of a Thursday night game going on as well. Talking to Dr. Jene Bramel about some injury news around the National Football League. And chat room can react to me or Dr. Gene and get a question in if you'd like. But Dr. Gene, I want to know about Royce Freeman and if you expect him to be eased back in. Now, yesterday when I talked to Vance Joseph, he was like, yeah, it wasn't perfect his day of practice when he was limited, but he had a full day of practice today. And, going against the Chargers, you might want to keep Rivers on the sidelines, might want to use him a little bit more. Would it be advisable from a high ankle sprain and a couple missed weeks and a bye week? Would it be advisable to maybe ease him back in?
I think that's going to be a question for the Broncos offensive staff. It looks like, I mean, they've given him enough time. There's been enough time for him to recover from a high ankle sprain. It may not be fully recovered, but recovered enough where you wouldn't necessarily expect that there's a high risk of aggravation. And the fact that he's fully practicing pretty strongly suggests, as did Vance Joseph earlier in the week, said that they expected to have him back and they were hoping that that was going to be the case. So I think they're preparing with that in mind, but whether or not he gets a bigger share of carries than what he was getting pre-injury, even gets back to getting his pre-injury workload, still remains to be seen. But I think he's going to be healthy enough to do so if the Broncos decide that's what they want to do.
Well, I was going to save Marvin Jones for Matt, but due to technical difficulties, I will ask you on Matt's behalf about Marvin Jones. One of the things that took me by surprise, Gene, is when they reported on the bone bruise in Marvin Jones' knee, they said, and his ACL and all the other ligaments are intact. I was like, I had no idea that we were worried about that.
Yeah. That's what everybody always wants to know, right? When you hear knee injury and you hear a player can't come back and you hear an MRI, that's the immediate concern. And it's not as big a concern as it used to be, because we almost always find out within a couple of hours after the game ends that the team is worried about an ACL and we're just waiting for the MRI results as a formality. And when we didn't hear that with Jones, it was pretty likely that there wasn't a major structural issue going on. Now, sometimes we hear about MCLs or PCLs, and in this case, because of a hyperextension, you worry about some of those things. But it's nice that he just had a bone bruise. Adam Schefter's initial report calling him day-to-day was probably optimistic. Most of these bone bruises, we've seen it with Donte Foreman and so many other players over the years, they require a couple of weeks to recover. Now, if it was just in the right place, where it really wasn't in a weight-bearing area of the knee, maybe they get back a little bit sooner. But the Lions are, we've talked about this with Theo Riddick and Darius Slay last week and some other players. They're fairly underreported, so it's really hard to get a read on their injury report. But generally speaking, if players aren't back to practice through Thursday, it's really unlikely that they're going to play, even some of the stronger names. Now, we have seen players practice through the week and then not practice on Friday and be cleared to play. But if they're usually not doing much Wednesday, Thursday, it means there's a pretty high concern that they're going to be able to go. So my sense is we're probably going to see another DNP from Jones on Friday, take a week off and see how he looks the following week, knowing that we've got a short week coming up with the Lions Thursday game on Thanksgiving. That may be playing into this decision-making process a little bit as well. So I think he's more doubtful than questionable. Leave it open for a little bit of a surprising full practice tomorrow and allow him to go. But I think given what the injury is, given the fact that they've been cautious with him so far and there's a Thursday game, probably that's the best chance of him playing, and maybe even the week after that.
If you know your Audible geography, well, you know that I'm around Denver. Bloom's around Austin, Matt's around Atlanta, and Dr. Gene, you're around Cincinnati. So what in the hell is Marvin Lewis saying with AJ Green? Like, no, he actually might play. Like, what? What's why did he say that? What's going on? Why? It makes us all excited for nothing.
I think Marvin Lewis has lost his mind over the past few years in so many different ways. AJ Green, I think the initial report we got from him that said after he was seen by the specialist that it's going to be a couple of weeks, they're going to let things calm down, hopefully, the swelling and some of the inflammation he's got around the base of that toe, rehab him aggressively, knowing that he has been a quick healer in the past for multiple different injuries, and hope that when he goes back, if he needs, if it's an in-person evaluation or whatever it may be, that he's going to be cleared to do a little bit more football-related activity in the hopes that they can get him ready to go. Now, Cincinnati's got a couple of divisional games coming up. They would love to have Green involved for those, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put him at risk of aggravation, put him at risk of a compensatory injury because he's been a little bit out of conditioning, having not done much over the last 3 weeks. I guess it's possible they list him doubtful on Friday and leave open a sliver's chance that he'll play. But I think this is another week, and hopefully we hear that some follow-up exams have gone well and that he's able to get back sooner than the 4 to 6 weeks, which seemed optimistic to begin with.
Gene, how soon before we get to see Joey Bosa back on the field?
Soon. I think it's really unlikely that he goes through a week of limited practice and gets activated this week, even in a situational pass rushing role. It's an injury that's been, we're talking 3 months here now before he's been back on the field. And yes, we've heard that he's doing some running and a little bit of conditioning, but until he gets back there and does some football related things, you'd have to think that the Chargers are really not going to risk any sort of injury. And, we've heard bruise, we've heard speculation about Liz Frank injuries and other types of foot sprains and strains. Not clear exactly what it is. It's very likely to be some sort of midfoot thing, whether it's Liz Frank or otherwise. And there's no sense in putting him out there until he's fully conditioned and ready. The tone of his comments in the locker room today on Thursday was pretty promising, but I think that's more for next week than this week. So hopefully that's the way things go down. If he does get on the active roster this week, it's going to be just for a very limited number of pass rushing snaps, but plan on week 12 rather than week 11.
The Audible Live continuing on, talking to Dr. Jene Bramel, and everyone's looking forward to Monday night. Everyone, you're starting all your Rams. Josh Reynolds, hot DFS tip. Like, everyone's starting him, so I don't know how hot that is. And everyone's kind of waiting until Saturday for Sammy Watkins. How do you feel about Sammy's availability this week and, ability to play in this game on Monday night?
I feel pretty good. I think the intention all along, from what we heard towards the end of last week through Sunday morning, was that the Chiefs were planning on being as cautious as possible. Not that they were taking last week's game lightly in any way, and not that they were putting any additional value on this game against the Rams, but they know that they're going to need all hands on deck. It's going to be a very up and down the field offensive game. At least you think that's what's likely to happen. And they'd like to have Sammy Watkins available to stretch the field along with Tyreek Hill and make some room for, just have all their offensive weapons there. So Ian Rappaport pretty much from the beginning, very early last week, said that expect the Chiefs to keep Watkins out. As we went through the weekend, everything sounded pretty precautionary to the point where they even allowed him to practice last Friday in a limited fashion. Watkins is back on the practice field today, again limited. All of the beat writers expect him to play. So barring some sort of unexpected practice participation situation through the weekend, I think you can expect him to play Monday night.
Gene, since you are a connoisseur of the defensive side of the ball, what kind of coverage do you call to end up with Bobby Wagner on Davante Adams?
I think, was it, Matt would probably know, maybe you guys read this too. Was it Doug Farrar that was making some, or maybe actually I think it was Matt Bowen that I saw that was talking about how easy it is for some of these newer offensive schemes to break down cover three, and sometimes putting players in these situations where you've got safeties one-on-one in very difficult situations and linebackers on slot receivers and such. So probably just a breakdown of the cover three that Seattle's been running for years.
Yeah, right. Okay, so here's my real question.
That's the long answer to the...
My real question here is about Tyrone Smith and back spasms. There's not many offensive linemen that are as important to their offense as Smith. What, not just for this week, but going forward, should we take into account with knowing that he's having back spasms?
Yeah, this is not new for Smith. This is 2, probably 3 years worth of, we know that he's got a disc issue there that I don't think has been surgically addressed ever. I'm pretty sure it hasn't. Where at some point during the middle of the season, he's had back spasms for multiple weeks at a time. Now, he's probably had cortisone shots in the past. He always plays through. There have been a couple of weeks in the past couple of years where it's a lot more dicey and more of a game time decision than you would expect it to be. Again, knowing that the Cowboys have a short week coming up, maybe that plays into this a little bit. But Zach Martin has been limping around, and he's going to play through it. Tyron Smith has been struggling with back spasms and sometimes misses some plays, but I would expect both of those players, to play through these things and then be back on Thursday next week, Thanksgiving as well.
How do you feel about late additions to the injury report? Because we get Wednesday and there's guys that get the day off and it's Veteran Day of Rest and Larry Fitzgerald, blah, blah, blah. But then Thursday rolls around and all of a sudden Keenan Allen's on there. And Keenan Allen is on a late addition, or added, I guess, not necessarily late, but was fine Wednesday and then added on Thursday with a finger and a hip.
Yeah.
So not just one, but two things. Okay, he's probably going to play, Dr. Gene, but how much of a concern, watching Friday, just kind of maybe being a little nervous about having Keenan Allen in your lineup?
Always. I think we always have to watch Friday just to be sure. But I think we have seen teams bend away from the traditional gradually increase practice participation through the end of the week as a positive sign. We've seen more and more teams. We just talked about it with Detroit. Keenan Allen was in this situation earlier this year where he didn't do much practice and then maybe did a little bit on Friday, or teams are holding players out toward the end of the week rather than beginning of the week just to get them a little bit of rest. I think, with the amount of practice that they're not doing anymore, there's tons of teams now that just get listed as doing walkthroughs all week long, and they're really not doing much hitting and padded practices at all. I don't think we have to worry too much. I think I'm paying a lot more attention, as we always did, but this year I think it's more important to pay attention to Friday participation, Friday media interviews, Saturday transactions as far as is the team bolstering that particular part of the depth chart, and then listening to what Rappaport and Schefter and so many others have to say through the weekend. I'm not as concerned about the midweek injuries unless there's some sort of report that goes with it that strongly suggests that somebody saw something happen that was a concern, or we're hearing worrisome things out of the locker room, or not seeing those guys available to the media on Thursday or Friday. I just don't put much stock in it. And we kind of jokingly talked about this with Eric Ebron a couple of weeks ago, that the number of injuries on the chart, on the injury report, does not necessarily mean that a player is less likely to play. Is it the finger that's a little bit more of concern? Is it the foot that's a little bit more of a concern with Keenan Allen, or some of the knee issues and other things he's had? I don't know. And the Chargers would also go into that bucket of teams that don't have a lot of beat writers that seem to be plugged in enough to do more than just list the injury report and have any more to say than that. So I would expect we'll get a little bit of guidance from Anthony Lynn on Friday. I don't have a big concern that Allen will not be able to play. And I think if he is active and ready to go, you can prepare for him to have his usual workload.
Gene, how did we end up where the last time the Vikings played, Stephon Diggs missed the game, and the next time the Vikings play, he's the healthier of the two wide receivers?
Yeah, I think that was a caution situation there too. And I know that the Vikings sort of threw a little bit of a red herring at us when they allowed Dalvin Cook to play, who probably had the more likely injury to be aggravated with the hamstring situation than Stephon Diggs in his rib. But this is consistent with what we were hearing from Mike Zimmer and the team and the national reporters through the past couple of weeks. Is it was a painful injury for Diggs, but they expected him to be back after the bye, and his practice participation is in line with that as well. I don't know what to think about Thielen. He did look a little bit gimpy previous to the bye with the calf situation. I think that's the more limiting of the two injuries that he's listed with. He sort of deferred to Mike Zimmer, as a lot of the Vikings often do Wednesday and Thursday. Didn't want to talk about his injury much. That raises a little bit of concern for me, but we saw that with Dalvin Cook in the past. We've seen that with some other players, so that doesn't portend gloom and doom necessarily. I think I would tentatively expect him to play. The tougher call with Thielen is going to be limited during his last game, 2 weeks of recovery through the bye, and not right yet makes you a little bit concerned that he may not be able to, he may not be at full strength. But by the same token, we may see a full practice on Friday, him not listed on the game status report, and be entirely good to go. And today's lack of comments to the media be a little bit of, a little bit of a distraction there. So we'll see what Friday says and make a call through the weekend.
Dr. Jene Bramel, you follow him on Twitter at Jene Bramel, and check out his second opinion blog at footballguys.com. Looks like we've got time for one more round of questions. And Dr. Jene, we certainly appreciate your time as always. I want to ask you about a player that we see limited all the damn time. Doesn't seem to be bothersome, but even out of bye, DeAndre Hopkins limited. Is he just one of those guys where you're like, yeah, it's going to be like that all year, whatever, I'm still starting him?
Yes, and the foot is the most common reason he's on the injury report, so it's not something new. I think we've seen him foot and groin and quad, and I think there was an elbow in there at one point for him this year as well. The Texans have to find some reason to list him as limited on the injury report because they're going to limit his reps throughout the year. They did so last year. They did so this year. I can't remember a time in which Hopkins was limited in practice and listed as more than questionable and not able to play. Most times he's not even listed on the game status report. So we'll have to think twice about him if they mark him as questionable, but I don't think there's too much concern with anybody in the local media or otherwise. So you can expect him to play as he usually does.
Gene, for teams that will be kicking the tires on Le'Veon Bell next year, a year off the game, is it a positive? Is it a negative? Or is it a non-factor in his status going forward?
I think it's probably even. Anytime you don't put another, 900 snaps and 350 touches on your body, I think that was the whole point of Bell taking this approach this year. But you're adding another year of age onto your joints and your body as well. And Bell isn't old. So I think hopefully there's a pretty good contract that gets signed early. He's available for off-season training activities and training camp, and he has plenty of time to condition, and we're not stretching this out because he's not getting what he wanted. I think somebody's going to pay him this off-season, and you'll see him participate in off-season activities. He'll be in condition and should be good to go.
All right, that is a wrap, Dr. Jene Bramel. I have a quiz for you, my friend. Are you up to the task tonight?
Oh, I guess we're about to find out.
Okay, what book
Oh no.
do I have on my drafting table? Be careful, but just any random guess?
No.
Because you have a nice mahogany, your office smells of mahogany. I got a bunch of comic books back there. Although Bloom, I did get that one book you recommended for me. I
Mumbo Jumbo?
Yes, I picked that up. I haven't started reading it yet. Dr. Jene, any guesses? It's not Mumbo Jumbo. I have that on the bookshelf, but anything?
Is it car related?
No, but it's actually pretty good. It's Spy Secrets That Can Save Your Life by somebody, Jason Hansen. There you go. So anyway, it's the Audible Book Club, ladies and gentlemen, and you get a book.
Coming soon to this an off season near you.
Right, exactly. I'll share some spy secrets when we're on the All-Star road trip in Mobile.
I'll be looking
Saucy Q. Oh, what's that Eddie Murphy movie? It was like Hercules. Like, yeah.
I'm ready, man. I'm ready this year for sure.
All right, Dr. Jene, be good, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
See you.
Bloom, let's get a game update.
Yeah, of course, after the first half showed us a potential high-scoring back-and-forth game with these quarterbacks, things have ground to a halt. A lot of pressure, actually. Kyler Fackrell, Utah State. My brain is drawing a blank, but he's coming on. Nick Who, for the pass rush, and also Clay Matthews. There was a play when Russell Wilson's ball got batted in the air, and he caught it for about a 10-yard loss. Aaron Rodgers not quite coming together now. We did see Equanimeous St. Brown make a nice catch. That play that I spoke of where Bobby Wagner was on Davante Adams about 50 yards downfield. Adams can only get 1 foot in. So this game has gotten, this is that point in the 15-round fight, round 9, 10, 11, where the judges' scorecards might be scoring this one, even rounds as they've been clenching in the middle of the ring and, punch your way out. And hopefully we'll see some more punches thrown, not literal punches, but these two quarterbacks show us what they can do. It's again, these teams, this is a quasi playoff game, a lot of games this week like that. And this one is a great one to lead it off.
Yeah, we got some really good games. We talked about that in the preview show this morning. By the way, the chat room is having fun with the book. They had to guess. Dub Mentality guessed Hustler.
That's not a book, though.
Right. Brian guessed Captain Marvel #1. So, yes. And Shane saying there's a Stan Lee reference incoming. Excelsior! As we get to the conversation, and you kind of finished there with Dr. Jene.
Yeah.
On Le'Veon Bell, and it is Thursday night, and obviously in the previews and everything that we do, we're not going to talk about Le'Veon Bell really, other than in passing or James Conner or now get Jalen Samuels if we're doing the waiver wire show, right? So let's dig into that. I really wanted to pick your brain tonight about the Le'Veon Bell situation because what was it, Bloom? Was it there were 2 other players that held out the whole year, franchise tag, right? Both defensive tackles, top of my head.
Yeah, I'm drawing
like Sean Phillips, and then there was like a Rams defensive tackle. Anyway, how's this work out for him in the end? And we'll take our Steelers hats off.
Yeah,
because James Conner, we're fine, baby. But it's over, it's done in Pittsburgh, and he'll be somewhere else. But how did we get here?
Well, I think how we got here was the Steelers. Very clearly, we joke about it kind of. We say, use them up. Well, that's what the Steelers were doing. And that's kind of the state of the running back position now. And I know that it's come up in previous conversations about this, that Le'Veon Bell's agent, I believe he almost exclusively represents running backs, right? Yeah. He's like the running back agent. And I've always joked that running backs should have their own union. And this was kind of an attempt to make a stand for running backs, or at the very least running backs who generate value as runners and a lot of value as receivers, creating mismatches, even being able to run routes out of the slot. All those things Le'Veon Bell added to this offense. And it's interesting because what this intersects with is conversations about, well, Saquon Barkley and using the number 2 pick on him, and can running backs add value to an offense, or running backs just at the intersection of the value the offense creates. And James Conner, while he's a different style of running back than Le'Veon Bell, sure seems to stand for the proposition that, and we saw this with D'Angelo Williams, late career D'Angelo Williams, any competent running back is going to harvest most of the value created for the running back position. And unfortunately, this stand for running backs has backfired. And we knew whenever David Johnson, young, maybe a year or two older than Le'Veon Bell, less mileage on him, took a 3-year, $36 million deal, which was less per year than what Le'Veon Bell was going to get this year, that Le'Veon Bell was probably not going to win this one. But I think that this would have made a lot more sense at the beginning of a CBA where, look, the franchise tag, if we're going to step back from this, the draft is kind of illegal, really. There's no other situation in any profession where you don't get to negotiate with your employer about or to get to, choose your employer or have some say in your employer.
You should just be happy to be there.
Yeah, really. The draft is really collusion, and the franchise tag is in some ways deeply unfair because, okay, so the draft is really in the labor world something deeply unfair to these workers. And then you say, okay, for these first 4 years, now we add this 5th-year option for the first round draft picks. And then we add the franchise tag where you say, well, we can keep paying you on a per year basis, but not truly have to commit to you. And these players know the clock is ticking on their career. And I think what Le'Veon Bell did was stand. And I can't remember who put it out there like this, but basically they said, look, the framework of this has been very anti-Le'Veon Bell, but the franchise tag was an offer by the Steelers. And he declined the offer. He said, no, I don't want to play for you for $14.5 million this year. Now, we can get into all of the debate of whether that was smart or not for him to do that, but it stands for the idea that the player has the right to say no, or at least this is the only way, because of the way the franchise tag works, that the player has a right that they can exercise to say no. And it's obviously a very costly right. And I think that he, in this stand for running backs and for other players that say no, they wanted to be able to say no, you're not just going to be able to franchise tag me again and again. At some point, if you want me to play for you, you have to commit. But with the new CBA coming up in a couple of years, I don't think there's anybody that's going to. The Kirk Cousins contract is a much better point, something to point to where players made some ground up there.
Right.
Where Kirk Cousins said, I want a fully guaranteed contract, and he got it. And who's going to be next? I don't think it's going to stay with just quarterbacks. I think eventually we will get more fully guaranteed contracts in the NFL because Kirk Cousins demanded that and got that. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be whatever victory there was for Le'Veon Bell. It's going to be an empty victory. And I would imagine, where this becomes interesting is if the Steelers do transition tag him, I think that he's not going to get an offer that's going to automatically make them say no. I don't think it's necessarily going to be an unattractive offer, and we could end up back in this same situation again. This may not be the last chapter.
Divorce is ugly, man. I mean, that's what this is. It's just, it's an ugly situation. I don't think anybody really wins, and fans turn against Le'Veon Bell because that's the thing with ownership. You've always got the fans to be like, see, this guy didn't want to show up. And at the end of the day, Bloom, I don't think this solves anything. I don't think. No. Maybe if the CBA was up like next year and you could have the, real recent example, but it's 2 years, man. Not that I'm counting down and stockpiling Jays to sell when there's no football. Football is the bread and butter. But would you like a pair of Jordans? Anyway, I don't think this changes anything. I don't think it breaks the system, and no,
it doesn't
at all.
Well, and James Conner partially is why, because Le'Veon Bell unwittingly proved that he doesn't actually add a lot of value to the Steelers' offense, even though he is an excellent individual player. It's the nature of the position. But the other problem here is that it seems like in every CBA, the NFLPA gives up ground. Last draft, it was the rookies who really took it. Especially first round rookies. they lost a ton. And of course, why wouldn't the NFLPA sell them out? Because they're not even members of the union yet,
Right. And the money was supposed to go to the veterans, and well, that didn't really happen.
It's going to some of the veterans. I mean, the veterans at the very top end, but it seems to me like the salaries, I mean, this gets into much larger. This is a Thursday night conversation, though. You look at some of these other sports and the money that some of these players that are middling NBA players, middling Major League Baseball. What was the number I saw? Like $300 million for Bryce Harper,
And he turned it down.
Yeah. So NFL players, I mean, there's no sport that has more interest than the NFL in this country. And the revenue should be there. Maybe because there's more players on the roster and so on, that and fewer games, I guess, to generate less ticket revenue, but ticket revenue isn't really where the money's coming from. I don't know. There's something missing in the equation here of how the football salaries aren't keeping up with the salaries in the other sports. But I'm afraid that what we're going to see is a replay of the last CBA, a lockout, and the players really not being able to outlast the owners, but hopefully not a missed year of football.
And I think it goes into the preseason. We missed the Hall of Fame game last time. Yeah. I think this one goes into the preseason. I have heard player representatives talk about leaving before the playoffs.
Yeah.
Now, that's only for the playoff teams, and then the rest of the guys are just going to have to, hang on. Hopefully it works. But that's the only time they have leverage at all, is to basically strike when the postseason begins. I still don't think that happens. I mean, it is in a large part, and I know regular Joes like all of us won't understand. It's a paycheck-to-paycheck league for a lot of players, even though their paychecks are quite massive. Now, Bloom, you asked the question, who gets that next Kirk Cousins deal? And here's what I think's coming, at least for quarterbacks. Big guaranteed deals, very short deals, very short terms. I think that's what's coming. It's going to filter through the quarterbacks first, and the next one to get it, we're actually watching him play tonight. He's Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to toss this out to you.
Ooh.
Because I ran across some information and I did some more digging on it. About Russell Wilson and how Seattle at this time, and again, it doesn't mean they're cutting him or whatever, but there is an out of his contract after this year. He's contracted through 2019, and then he's a free agent in 2020. But from what I heard, that made me go, huh? And then maybe do some checking, was that, okay, at this time, they're not sure they want to give him a big money deal, huge money deal, or fully guaranteed deal. Doesn't mean they won't change their mind. Doesn't mean they won't actually just begrudgingly do it because, well, franchise quarterbacks are hard to find, just like pass rushers, right, John Gruden? But when you look at Russell Wilson, and I told you that, Bloom, and we were like, ooh, scandalous. Do you think there's a possibility? Seattle, I know everything's possible, so that maybe that's a bad question, but really, you think Seattle would not give Russell Wilson a big, huge, fully guaranteed deal?
Well, the one thing that makes me have some pause and say maybe is this offense, which one of the things I think that, and I've mocked this before going into this year, and I feel like I should say, I was wrong, is that the worst running game and the worst, Detroit was right there with them, and not just worst statistically or success rate or whatever you want to use, DVOA, but just watching them try to run the ball. It was terrible, especially around the goal line. And they really have in 1 year, I mean, they have the number one rush offense right now, at least by the yards per game. I know that's skewed a little bit because Russell Wilson has his and so on. The point is they really did do this massive weakness of the offense, and they turned it into the strength and the foundation of the offense. However, when that's your blueprint, all of a sudden the quarterback isn't as important. And you look at paying somebody, $25 million a year guaranteed up front, and see some of the other things that we've talked about and you hear whispers about are, how much does the locker room embrace him? How much does the team really embrace him as a leader? And, these are decisions. I think we're looking at Tampa Bay and Jameis Winston. And in some ways, maybe they got lucky because the reveal happened both with the off-field and on-field stuff before they committed to him. So I think it's possible just because in the blueprint of their team, they don't necessarily. It's like the teams that won the Super Bowl, or one that won the Super Bowl and the one that went to the Super Bowl, the Marshawn Lynch teams. They didn't necessarily need a Russell Wilson at quarterback. They just needed a competent quarterback. They need some more pieces on defense. But if they can get 3 first-round picks for him, that's a lot of pieces on defense.
Yeah, and that's something to consider, at least to roll around there. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in that situation. You did mention Jameis Winston, which leads me to why in the hell would they ever play Winston the rest of this year? Like, even if Fitzpatrick sucks, shouldn't they? His 5th-year option's guaranteed only for injury.
Right.
And I think it's like 20 million, top of my head, Bloom. I wrote about it earlier this week. So his 5th-year option, it's not like it's 9 million or something like that. Like Bradley Roby's 5th-year option this year was 8.5 million. It's not like that. It's like 20 million. And if he gets hurt, you got to pay him 20 million. So why would they ever play Jameis Winston again if they could avoid it?
Yeah, I guess trying to save their jobs. If they think that that's still what their job is going to rely on. But you're absolutely right, and I think we saw this with Blake Bortles last year. It kicked in the 5th-year option, and then they are going to probably be on the hook for another 6 or 7 million next year. Although who knows, Bortles may change that story again before the end of this year. Davante Parker also has a 5th-year option, and he has a shoulder injury, so that one's going to be interesting. Miami might have already, which really I think would be an injustice for Parker and for all of us out here in fantasy land, because I want to see Parker on another team at this point. I think that the well's poisoned with him and Adam Gase. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't make any sense at this point to play Jameis Winston, and they have Ryan Griffin too, so they don't even need to have him. Just like what Arizona was doing to save money on Sam Bradford, getting the game day active bonuses. They don't even need to have Jameis Winston active as a backup, so they have to put him in there if Ryan Fitzpatrick gets hurt. At some point, you get to the cash flow, because just as a quick background on this, circling back to Le'Veon Bell, the Steelers really did save $14.5 million cash with Le'Veon Bell's decision. So in some ways, he did a solid for them.
It is the Audible Live here on Thursday night. We've got the pretty good game going on. Bloom, time for a game update or no?
Yeah, just more frustration, except now we have Russell Wilson. This is where they need Russell Wilson, right? He's moving them down the field. And we are seeing, I do think we've turned a corner, because what's been really frustrating to me watching Seattle the last 2 weeks against the Chargers and against the Rams is if they had a little more wide open element to their offense where they could spread the field and let Russell Wilson do what he does, they would have had a chance to not be in a frantic situation at the end of those games to tie those games, instead of the one they were in, and then they came up short. So I think we've seen the offense open up a little more. Maybe the short week of preparation just helps, because they're just going to something more where he can, in some of these situations, have more options as a passer, and not everything is being set up by the running game. It's not completely conservative. I think the Tyler Lockett downfield pass was by design, and as I say that, we are seeing Chris Carson grind it down to about the 20. So maybe we're going to see this game loosen up again here in the 4th quarter.
Here we go. Our man Jared Plotz in the chat room reacting says the only Cobra that should be on your hoodie is Cobra Kai. Well, I'm a Shelby guy, so I got one in the garage anyway. Humble brag. Axel Stone asked Bloom to give him some hope on his Lions. Will they turn it around? And my question, and maybe statement for Axel, is Matt Patricia is like the Wile E. Coyote of the NFL. He's this super genius. He's got all these great plans drawn up, and then Acme screws it up.
Kyler Fackrell just got another sack, by the way. It's good to know this name, Kyler Fackrell. I don't have much hope for the Lions. I think we've already seen, remember the first game of the year, they came out completely flat. They look good against Green Bay, and they look good against New England, and they can hang their hat on those 2 games, and Matt Patricia probably won't get fired because of those 2 games, but that's it. And what we saw last week against Chicago was they just mailed it in. TJ Lang is hurt. I don't know if he's going to play another game again for the Lions. again, Marvin Jones is banged up. They traded away Golden Tate. All they really did in the Golden Tate trade is just accelerate getting the 3rd round pick, assuming Golden Tate's going to get paid next year from the 2020 compensatory pick to the 2019 draft. Was it really worth it? Was it really worth it to take the air out of this offense? Was it really worth it then to put this defense in bad situations? Because you're not going to be able to establish a run as well. You're not going to be able to extend drives. And no, I think you're seeing a team that's actually, I think, going to be farther behind where they were going into the year. And then what we're watching for, and we'll get to see it on Thanksgiving, and they're going to have to play the Bears. And we just saw them play the Bears, and the Bears spanked them. And you just wonder if Detroit's going to be able to get up for games now, knowing that they're playing out the string.
Well, we go a lot of different places with this conversation, Bloom, but I kind of want to go in a certain direction. You and I have talked about writing a book about the podcasting of fantasy football and being the old man on the block. Check out the salt and pepper in the beard. But being the old man on the block, we've seen a lot come and go, not just in this industry, but in football. And I bring this up because I was spending a lot of time yesterday talking to Chris Harris about college offenses and college concepts and like how it's just movement. Like everything's the same.
Yeah.
Football doesn't really change. You just dress it up differently. And CHJ, Chris was telling me like, it's not an insult. It's not, you know, when you say college concepts, it's not like, oh, super dumbed down, simple. Like, no, it's just, it's motion, it's movement, it's jet sweeps. And Bloom, it feels like it's here to stay because it's really working. It's really working. And we're seeing the Chiefs run triple option. Okay. Now they dress it up, but they run triple option, which is something like, okay, Wildcat. How many of these things have we seen, right, in doing this show since 2006? How many of these things have we seen come and go? And I remember when like running back by committee was just starting. And see, this is where we really date ourselves, Bloom. But I just, as an observer of the NFL for a long time, and as an analyst of the NFL for a long time, it feels like these college concepts are now changing the game permanently, where football is almost unrecognizable. Throw on any 90s tape and watch the game, and first you'll see the hits and go like, well, that's illegal. They couldn't do that. But secondly, just like 3 yards in a cloud of dust doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I don't think the run game's dead. I just think the run game has evolved into short passes. So does it seem like to you, as an observer and an analyst for a long, long time, that college concepts are here and they're staying here?
Yeah, I think some of it is just the turnover in coaches, because I think what we have had for a long time, Cease, that we lamented, was coaches that stay in the league and just keep doing it the same way. And that keeps you in the league because, you know, GMs hire guys that they know, and then head coaches get guys that they know to be their defensive and offensive coordinators. And it stays the same kind of football. And I think that really the Rams are just such a perfect example of this in so many ways. You know, you go from Jeff Fisher to Sean McVay. You go from the coach who's been doing it the same for a long time to the guy who's younger than some of the guys on the team. And you see them doing some things like they're basically running the same formation 90% of the time. You see how Jared Goff looked like a bust in year one, and then put him in the right system, with decisions that suit. It's really funny too, because looking back on it, Carson Wentz would have fit a lot better with the way Jeff Fisher built teams, and Jared Goff would have fit a lot better with the way the Eagles team is built. And we've ended up with them like twins switched at birth or something. But they end up getting the perfect coach for Jared Goff, and they surround him with the right players. They make the commitment to rehabilitate the offensive line, and you see the change in a player like Todd Gurley. You see how his talents that were squandered in a system that seemed like, because they drafted him to be this hammer, now all of a sudden Todd Gurley, I mean, whatever you would have said about Todd Gurley's receiving ability at Georgia, nobody would have forecast this in the pros.
No.
Not the most optimistic projection of what kind of receiver he would be. So I think that because it's a copycat league, and because everybody is going to emulate what works, then this is what's working. And the other beautiful thing about it is that we're seeing what we talked about many times on the show, the quarterback shortage. There's not 32 starting quality NFL quarterbacks. However, where that gap can be made up, and we're seeing this, say, with Nick Mullins in San Francisco, is an offensive head coach or offensive coordinator that gets you part of the way. And with Jared Goff, I mean, he's in his ear, Sean McVay, like looking, they step back, just like some of the stuff we've seen in college. And I think it isn't going to go away because it's working. What has to happen, and there was good stuff written this week by Jene Bramel, by Connor Orr, and by Doug Farrar, or was it Mike Tenier? I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, I can't. It all starts to run together because there's so much great stuff being written. There was a bunch of great stuff written this week about where's the innovation on defense? What happened to great defenses? I think there was a lament, like, where's the next Buddy Ryan going to come from? Because you get the same kind of pieces on defense. Like, look at it, Aaron Donald, watch Darius Leonard or Budda Baker or Derwin James. I mean, you have players that if you set them up correctly, you can put the deception, you can put the offense on their heels. That's what we saw when Buddy Ryan did what he did. So that's the ball's back in the defensive coordinator's courts to put the offenses on their heels, or to make the offenses have to be in reactive mode in some way and use these variety of talents. And we see it occasionally. We saw Dick LeBeau do some amazing things with zone blitzes that innovated. And they would say that every week you played Dick LeBeau, you'd see a blitz you've never seen before. So that the onus is now on the defensive coaches to respond. And who knows, Cecil, they're probably going to look back and talk to their buddies in college football and say, what do you do against these college concepts to slow them down? Because they've been having to do it forever.
Right. And you're seeing the way defenses are changing. Like everyone should just run 4-3 because there's no 3-4 linebackers coming in. It's very interesting, the evolution. And I truly believe that's what it is, Bloom. It's just like, hey, we don't have a top 12 quarterback, but if he can do this, we can win a lot of games. Yeah. And that's what's prompted this. It was necessity is the mother of invention. Well, guess what they invented? A type of football, a brand of football that may be not identifiable to what we grew up on, Bloom, or what we love. Because honestly, I love the ground game. I love ground and pound football. That's my favorite type of football, and it's dead. It doesn't exist. But this type of football, the consumers love this type of football. And we did have a chat room comment, and this was from Kay about CFL. And CFL, and one of our dear friends, Russ Landy, up there helping to run the Alouettes, just those type of concepts. So maybe we'll see an influx of some more CFL players into the NFL, because of the movement that's up there. But it's all very fascinating. And by the way, Brian says, Bloom, a tremendous compliment, because I don't know if we've done enough drinking game tonight. So Clarity, Senior Bowl, blah, blah, blah. There you go. Take a couple drinks. But Brian calls you the Joe Rogan of fantasy football. Wow. And as someone who watches Joe Rogan's podcast every day, to that I would say double true. I don't know if you messed around with as many psychedelics as Rogan has.
Not the high wattage stuff. When you get older, then there's a time and place for everything.
I mean, Rogan does the DMT? Is that right, Bloom? Is that what he does?
That makes you like go to an alien planet and hear languages and see other like character sets and things that I'm not quite ready yet. But maybe the NFL is.
Yeah, maybe they need to be ready. But we're all here on this magic carpet ride. A lot of compliments also about On the Couch. And again, kind of talking. We may do it one day, but just talking about this industry and how fantasy football podcasting has exploded. I've said it before. I'll say it again, Bloom. It was really On the Couch that brought the community together, because people won't remember this, that a lot of fantasy sites, never us, but there was a lot of sites out there that were like, won't talk about other sites. Everyone already knows about Footballguys. And I love that we're everyone's big secret. And I love that. Thank you, guys. Thank you. We appreciate that. But, I think people probably know about Footballguys. Maybe more people should know, right? It's the one thing we've battled in this industry is like, word of mouth is great for businesses unless it's fantasy football sites, because everyone holds on to them like secrets. But back in the day, and certainly before On the Couch, it was unheard of for any sort of cross-pollination between sites. especially in any sort of show form where you could say, hey, here's someone that does really good work that works for someone else.
Yeah, and I think it's the fantasy football players actually that have taken it the next step. And I even appreciate. I know I have my weaknesses, my Achilles heels, as a fantasy football player and analyst, and I know that some of the longtime listeners to the show just know how to filter that out. Like, oh, there goes Bloom about Gronk again, or Marshawn Lynch. Well, we can ignore that, but I'm glad that what you're seeing are these really smart listeners, readers, consumers picking and choosing the best things. And what's beautiful about it, I had Pete Davidson, Rotobahn, on the couch this week. We talked a little bit before the show, and we got just a little bit into it on the show, although I probably should have gotten into it more with the extended overtime. We remember the big receiver versus little receiver debate, and we remember analytics versus film. And of course, in the draft season, that will fire up again some. But I do think we're coming to the point where we're going to get to peace, and people are going to be able to see, because of the high level of intelligence and judgment quality of the audience, that yeah, of course they both have merit. Of course they both can answer questions. Of course they both can give you good questions to ask. And you have all these people that are out on their ledge, advancing their particular part of the knowledge and understanding that we have of the game. And as I was saying on the show, it still will remain essentially unknowable. And because of the evolution and because of the change, it will remain constantly in motion, which is what will keep us coming back to it. And it's what will make it a continually stimulating conversation. And I think that's really what we all come for. And I'm flattered that people continue to find our show stimulating.
Matt Jarvis, by the way, asked quickly, Courtland Sutton this week, rest of season. Yeah. It is a Broncos show. That's right, Matt. Sure. There's no other drink. I really think Jeff Heuerman hurts Courtland Sutton as something that, and I believe, and Case Keenum was actually confident when I talked to him yesterday, which is unusual. It's rare, because when he's been asked other things, like, can you drop 40 on the Chiefs? He's always hesitant. But I asked him if the best was yet to come. And he's like, yeah. So if that's truly the case, I think the way that they've unlocked him is just by using the tight end. And I think that hurts Courtland Sutton. And Sutton, if he wants more opportunity, got to stop dropping touchdown passes, kid. So I would like to be a little bit more flowery about the projections for Courtland Sutton, because that's my dude, and a great, great guy, by the way. Before the DT trade, he was frustrated, but not in a negative way. He was frustrated and like, man, I want more. But he never let that bubble over into his play. And he's a great blocker and just a great motivated kid. Really love Courtland Sutton, but I feel that the Broncos change with Jeff Heuerman. I think it sticks, and I hate it because I don't like Jeff Heuerman. But anyway, Bloom, final thoughts tonight's show.
Oh, we just saw another bomb to Davante Adams. Aaron Rodgers putting on a deep passing show tonight. We'll see what Russell Wilson will do to answer, and then what Aaron Rodgers will do to answer. But both of these teams, I think the quarterbacks will have a chance to pull their team forward into potential push towards a playoff berth, or maybe be out-dueled. So it's going to be another one. Like we said, Cease, maybe there'll be some play at the end that we give a name to that's controversial, but this game has lived up to the billing. We've got a lot of good games on Sunday. We've got a great game Sunday afternoon between New Orleans and Philadelphia. We've got one Sunday night between Minnesota and Chicago. And then, of course, the main course, KC and the Rams. So it's a good time to be a football fan. I think we talk about this every year, and I know for those of us in the industry, or for people that really get immersed in football, around Thanksgiving is when we feel a little, I don't want to say worn down, but certainly you get that initial rush of cracking the seal on a season. It powers you for a while, but then we have a week like this that I think will fill us all back up with energy, and just in time. This we will taking off next week, of course, because of Thanksgiving, so we won't be back for 2 weeks. Everybody can take time to appreciate, ruminate, contemplate, and certainly every time it seems like, since we've been in like big picture mode, thinking about how long we've been doing this and everything, because it is quite a thing to see how far we've gone, and to know with all the great people, and some of the names are still the same names that were there in the Blog Talk Radio chat room. And that just, I can't even say how that makes me feel, and to know that we have a long journey ahead too.
Yeah, and I love that on our Thanksgiving special we get to play. Be thankful for what you got.
Yeah, diamond in the back.
Doing the thing with the gangster lean. He's Sigmund Bloom. Follow him on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. I'm at Cecil Lammey. The show's at the Audible, and we thank you all for listening. Again, as Bloom said, we'll be off next week for Thanksgiving. Everyone, just enjoy your time with family. It's what you got. Your family, your friends, the people around you. And thanks for giving us your time. We really, really mean it. And as both of us who have gone through emotional roller coasters for multiple reasons with you on this show, it's special, man. It's special because you guys help us in ways that you probably don't even realize. So thank you all. Stay tuned and stay frosty.